Welcome back to the secret world of human trafficking. I'm your host, David J. Story. I'm also the author of the Omega book series. Today we have a special guest. Let's go ahead and hear what they have to say. I want to welcome today Dan Emr. Go ahead and give us a little idea about who you are and your background.
Yeah. Thank you, David. It's a pleasure to join you. And thanks for pronouncing that weird last name correctly, because that's like just something I've had to live with. But you said it right. And I appreciate that. But yeah, I'm Dan Emmer.
I appreciate it.
Yeah. I'm the founder and executive director of an organization called Worthwhile. Our website's worthwhile.org. And we serve survivors of human trafficking. And so, this today, I'd love to share with you kind of how I got into where I am, because I think oftentimes people are like, well, who's called to do this work, or who should be doing this work? And I'm just like anybody else. I often share with people when I speak at conferences, I'm the least qualified person there. And so, my background is not in social work, is not in trauma therapy, but it's something that I felt called to do. And yeah, interesting life path to get me to where I am today, and things along the way that kind of help steer me. But happy to share that with you today.
Okay. Well, tell us a little bit about your history and then go into what does Worthwhile do?
Yeah. So my history, part of a lot of times people ask, well, how did you get into this? And the reality is I wasn't seeking this out. I was more or less pursuing the American dream, right? Which is go get a really good job. So I was working for an engineering firm out of college, married at the time, with two young kids, and pursuing that American dream of, get a good job, make lots of money, buy lots of stuff, and then you'll be happy. At least is what we're told. And so instead, for me, like I
Mm,
started going down that path,
yes.
but I learned about human trafficking, back in 2010, and I was just kind of stunned to realize that people were being exploited, and ultimately led me to quit my job, which you know you can only imagine. My wife was thrilled when I came home and said, "Hey, this job that's afforded us a house in Florida, a house in Pennsylvania, you could stay home and raise our two kids. That's gone now." So I kid, she was not thrilled. It was more like, wow, we've been talking about this, but you actually did it. But the reality is that I felt called to do something like this. And yeah, the reason partly in that too is a lot of times people say, well, it was crazy. And I would say, yeah, from the world's standpoint, that career move was not a great career move, right? From the world standpoint, it's like, you're making good money to willingly leaving that to making no money. But then I always share with people, I kind of had in my back, I had this card in my back pocket to play, which was my upbringing, and that was really my parents. They set the bar high in the sense of growing up as a kid outside of
Hmm.
Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I hit the lottery. As a kid, we had 18 acres of land. We had ponds. I could go fishing for catfish and bass. We had an in-ground pool. We had dirt bikes to go riding around, and I had a zip line, all these things. I was the youngest of four. And one day my parents just called us in, and my dad, he worked for Prudential Financial. My mom was an ICU nurse, and they called us in and at age 12, me with my three older siblings, they shared, all this stuff's fun, and we're glad we can have you, enjoy this, but it's not really what's important. And then they began to kind of explain to my siblings and I how they felt called to leave behind what they had to go and help a country that was now free. And so at the age of 12, I saw my parents give up everything, and we moved to Ukraine. And so I grew up from the age of 12 to 18 in Ukraine. And when they first explained this to me, all I was accustomed to is every year we'd go to the white sandy beaches of Cancun, Mexico. So my 12-year-old mind, I'm like, sure, sign me up. We're going to go to the white sandy beaches of Ukraine. I was a little mistaken on that, because it was not quite that way. But we instead I grew up on a dirt street, which was also oftentimes a muddy street, because it was, not paved. And at the end of, the road, about 500 feet from my house, was a meat processing factory. So that only, smelled wonderful on hot summer days. But I look at what my parents did, and what I saw in their own life is when you invest in people, you reap the benefits of that. You find purpose, you find a calling, and you are able to find fulfillment in what your life is really meant for. And so, flash forward many years later, I had started down my own career path, and I was sitting in church, and this young couple came in and was shared about human trafficking and the work they were doing. And they were doing this work in Cambodia. And I just sat there. I could not imagine that people were being exploited. People were being treated as if they were a commodity to be exchanged as a product. And it was a
Mhm.
burden on my heart. And I remember I went right up to that couple afterwards. They're a young couple, and I just said, "I want to help you however I can." And they had started their work in Cambodia under this other organization, and they were helping, these women by giving them employment through making apparel, making clothing. So I pulled my brother in on this, and we gave them like an order for 2,500 shirts, so they'd have employment for the ladies. They'd also have income. But at the ninth hour, that whole organization shut down, not to the fault of the young couple, but the organization shut down. Then I was left with that decision, like, what do I do? And so, a lot of times it's kind of, you feel like we often will say, I can't, I can't make this step. I can't make this commitment. I can't make this change because either it's the timing's not right. I have young kids, there's no money in it, all these reasons, and the biggest one of all, which I've already shared, like, we're not qualified, right? And the reality is, like, and I don't know your story or your audience, but for me, again, faith is a part of this, and I'm like, I feel like oftentimes there's a factor where the qualified aren't always called, but the called become qualified, and I feel like that was kind of my scenario. And so back in 2012, we launched Worthwhile, first working in India, kind of replicating that model that they had done in Cambodia. And we called ourselves Worthwhile Wear at that time and provided employment. So I built a factory. I kind of took my engineering background and helped, outfit a facility to be a sewing factory. And we could train up and help women that were girls that were exploited get out of those situations. And then as we started that, shortly thereafter, within months, I started recognizing this is an issue in the United States. It's not just an over there thing. It's happening where we live, where I live. And so I, really made a commitment to provide a solution. And so, here we are almost 15 years later. And what started with an employee of one, myself working in my basement, about 100 hours a week. Again, my wife loved that too. But just trying to make this organization get up and running, it required a lot of time. But um, started as one employee. Today, we have about 130 employees in the U.S., and we offer rather holistic approach and addressing the needs of survivors of trafficking and exploitation. And then I can share more about that. But the reality, the part of this story that I want to drive home is just I look back now, and yes, it was a bad career move from the world standpoint of making money to no money, but from a self point of view, from myself, finding purpose and seeing lives change has made it all worthwhile.
Wow. Well, tell us a little bit about your program that you have in Worthwhile.
Yeah, so we set out, like I shared, in India initially, and then we said, okay, there's a need here. And I think sometimes we are tempted to kind of react when we hear stuff. And a lot of times, even myself could be guilty of this, but organizational founders and leaders can be propelled forward with passion. But we have to be cautious because sometimes passion, we let it steer us as well and steer you every which way. But we really need to seek guidance before we move forward with that passion. Let the passion be the fuel, not the steering wheel. And so the steering wheel for me, was seeking
Mhm.
counsel from others in this field of work with a lot of recovery centers, domestic violence shelters, because what we were finding is in talking with survivors, they would say, I didn't know where to go. I had an addiction, so I went to a recovery center. I got out of that situation and I was homeless, so I went to a homeless shelter. And so in talking with survivors and talking with these other organizations, we said, let's be really mindful in how we build an approach and really a holistic approach. And so today, from day one of me working in my basement to where we are today, we have a variety of different programs addressing the individual as a whole. And the way we do that is we first engage with them where they're at. And so recognizing that oftentimes a survivor of sexual exploitation will likely also have a history of someone exploiting them. We said we need to meet them where they're at. And we do that through our outreach program called Worth It. And Worth It is a program that we've been operating since 2018. And that's something where we go out into the community. We offer a 9-week program where individuals that are, going to these recovery centers, going to domestic violence shelters, our team goes into about 180 different social service agencies and provides education on what human trafficking looks like to the staff. But then they also work with the clients. And then the clients refer into our Worth It program for that 9-week period where we do a deep dive on trauma. Because so often we see individuals going into these different programs in our communities and they're, being served kind of at the surface level. Like the things that are easy to see are the things that we address. And that's not to fault that. That's good. We should provide housing, food, other services, recovery from addiction. But a lot of times we see people in these repeating patterns because the trauma has never been addressed. So Worth It does a deep dive on addressing trauma, how it affects our bodies, how it physically affects us in a negative way, how it affects our minds and how we think of ourselves and how we see the world. And we spend time just recognizing that we all have a form of trauma, and it's we try to destigmatize it and have those open dialogues through the Worth It program. So we do that. We also then connect them to resources through the Worth It program. So wherever they're living, we run this in the greater Philadelphia area in multiple counties. And we say, these are resources available to you. And we invite those social service providers to come in and do a training on a topic that they're proficient in and experts in, and then also extend their services to those individuals. And then lastly, one of the things that's most important is we try to build relationship. So where we host these Worth It programs, they're oftentimes we incorporate volunteers or volunteer groups, providing meals, transportation, and we encourage those participants in the Worth It program to connect with those individuals because, if we're being realistic here, like when we want to see someone really heal and become whole again, programming is great, but it really accounts for maybe 20% of that change. The other 80% is through healthy people and healthy relationships. So Worth It kind of does all those things. And we serve women that have been exploited and trafficked that are 18 and over. We serve men that have also been trafficked, and also understanding that there's a form of prevention in this too, because I think we all can recognize that hurt people hurt people. That's a common expression, but it's also a reality. And so we work with men that have been exploited, that have been trafficked, but they also in turn, in their hurt, have then exploited others. And so helping them recognize that. And we've had many men that have gone through that program say, I see people differently. I didn't realize the hurt I was causing. And then we also offer Worth It to youth. So for adolescents and helping them recognize that they're not alone in their healing journey. So we do that. We also offer long-term housing. So we offer the housing on 2 properties, and the housing program is called The Well, and it's this program where they really can, for 2 years, build a new foundation under their feet. Because so often, what we heard from survivors is like, we needed more time. I needed a safe space, and so we're fortunate that outside of Philadelphia, we have a housing program on 82 acres of land where we can offer that safe space. They can really learn life skills. They can work on their trauma through counseling sessions, through group sessions, different therapies, somatic yoga, things like that. And then we also have the opportunity for them to transfer into a secondary home, which is independent living. So they can really put into practice the things they've learned during year one. And so we offer that. And in addition to that, so we're talking holistic, right? So we connect with them in the community, provides stability and safe housing.
Yeah.
The other part, though, too, is something that oftentimes is missed, and we're so glad that we can offer this, is that sustainable part. So if you help someone and you provide them housing and trauma recovery, that's wonderful, and you should continue to do that. However, when someone's in this program and they leave, right, they're left often to figure out, well, how do I now sustain myself? So one of the things we also offer through our worthwhile thrift stores is we offer employment. And these aren't like your traditional thrift stores. They don't smell, they're not ugly, they're not messy. They're aesthetically pleasing. They're, 30,000, 40,000 square feet in size. So they're like the size of a Target or a Walmart. And it's where survivors can learn employable skills. And, so often you'll have individuals that are coming through our programs and they'll like, hey, I've never had a job, like a real job, or I haven't worked in a long, long time. And so having a safe space for them to kind of refine those skills or learn them for the first time is really important. And I remember one survivor. She came into my office at one of our stores. I had my office, and she came in, had just ripping mad, and was cussing me out using really colorful language and saying, "You're stealing from me." And I'm like sitting there, kind of like, "What's going on?" And so I stopped her. I said, "Well, number one, let's just get this point across. If this was a real world scenario, you're now fired." And her eyes got real wide. She's like, "Really?" I go, "Yes. Like what you just did is a fireable offense." And I said, "So let's try this again." And she took it upon herself. She actually walked out of my office and walked back in as if like a reset was taking place. And she proceeds to say, "Okay, I have a question. I
Yeah.
got my first paycheck and there's money missing and I don't know why." I said, "Okay, that's a fair question. So let me look at your first paycheck." And I look at it with her and I go, "Oh, it feels like someone's stealing from you. Those are called taxes. It's not us. That's the government." So it was a very good learning curve for her to take that in, but
No,
she was able to learn from that experience.
she
Yeah.
was right. She was right to begin with.
Yeah. It said that it was just she was blaming the wrong person.
Yeah, she
So,
was right.
or so
Someone was stealing from her. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. So it was great for her
Well,
though to learn that and then
that's
keep,
sort of funny, but
yeah. That's what it felt like for her. So we with that
yeah,
the
I've heard
employment
that.
piece. Yeah. The employment piece helps though in learning those
Yeah,
skills. And
I've heard that from other interviews.
yeah.
Yeah, I've heard that from other interviews I've had where, once they're rescued and they're now survivors, they have no skills outside of what they were doing. So, I know some end up having to go back to prostitution
Mhm.
in order to support themselves
Yeah.
because they don't know or don't have the access to organizations like yourself.
Yeah.
And that's what we need more of is people like you and organizations like yours to help these survivors.
Yeah, absolutely. And we see that they learn a lot in the skills and sometimes like even the things that we might overlook. You're like maybe someone's not really interested in working at a thrift store, and we get that. But the reality is too like they learn to work with maybe they're not most pleasant customers. Right? You're working with people. You're getting accustomed to dealing with the population
Mhm.
that they're going to run into in the community. And so the stores also act as really like a beacon in our communities where individuals that are in need, they know they can go there and our team is equipped to either offer them services we have or redirect them to a social service provider in their area that would be more suited to help them. It also is a place where our community really shows up in big ways to volunteer and join with us. And we have a variety of ways people can volunteer through our housing program, through our Worth It program, and through the stores. And last year alone, we had over 2,400 volunteers, which is no small feat to have over 2,400 volunteers that are coming out on a regular. I know, some nonprofits would be thrilled to have 400 volunteers, and so we really engage the community in that way. And then, lastly, one of the things that we work to do is prevention, and so we do that on the national scale through a couple of different ways. One is we currently right now through May through July 30th every year, we run a program called the ACT Challenge. And we call it the ACT Challenge because when people learn about trafficking, they want to act, but they often don't know where or how. And so this ACT Challenge is wherever people are in the country, they can go out and log miles. And when they do that, they unlock sponsored dollars. So this ACT Challenge so far where we're at, I think we've unlocked around $60,000. We have about $170,000 to unlock still. So we encourage the community to go out, unlock those dollars. It's a reverse fundraiser. You don't have to raise the funds. We already did that. We have the
Mhm.
pledges. You just unlock it. And so what happens though is the community goes out, they invite their neighbor, they give them a postcard, say, hey, I see you walking your dog. Did you know you can unlock a dollar for every mile? And that goes towards restorative care, housing, counseling, other therapies, employment. And so we engage in that awareness is raised that way. But then the other more important one that I think your audience would be interested in is when we talk with survivors, right? The thing we hear the most is this started for me as a child. I was sexually abused at 8 years old, at 10 years old. That left me very vulnerable. And then I was open to further exploitation. And so knowing that and hearing that from thousands of survivors over the years, we said we need to provide a way to help youth kids understand number one, what to look out for, but also that they have worth and they have value. And I remember, so many survivors that I've spoken with, they just said, had someone said something to me, I wouldn't have felt so alone, as a kid. And so the way we address that is we have a national
Mhm.
program that we call the Words of Worth. And what that is, working with schools, it can be challenging because when they find out that you're an organization that's anti-human trafficking, they might say, well, that would be helpful for our students to hear about. However, that's too sensitive of a topic. So you can't come into the school. And so for about 10 years, I heard that. So I'm like, we got to find a new way. So we essentially kind of found our Trojan horse to get into schools. And this is something that your audience, wherever they're at in the country, they can reach out to us and apply for their school to receive this. But our Words Are Worth initiative, what it looks like is the schools invite us in and I'll come and I'll do a talk at an assembly where all the students are present. And the students hear about their worth through kind of 6 keywords. And after the assembly, the students help paint. We have a traveling artist that will go from school to school, and he stays there for about 2 weeks. And we fund this, and the artist will paint alongside
Mm.
the students this beautiful mural. Some of these murals are 50 feet long, some of them are 80 feet long, but they're big and they're prominent in the school and not just like a flash in the pan. They're there for years to come. And the mural is a bunch of beautiful flowers. And we talk about how, flower gardens have a variety of flowers and differences, and that is what makes them beautiful. And that's the same for people. The variety and differences in people make us beautiful together. So they paint this big mural of flowers, but then there's a central flower that has six petals on it. And this is what I use during the assembly talks. And on that flower, it says in the center of the flower, "You are." And then each petal says something different. So it says in the middle, "You are," and then one petal says, "Unique." You are enough. You are brave. You are seen. You are heard. And finally, you are worthwhile. And each one of those, we spend some time talking through those things. And especially on the brave one, sometimes being brave means speaking up when you are affected by someone in a negative way, and helping students understand that it's not a matter of the old kind of tool we used, or phraseology was, stranger danger. And we'll say, like, recognize that's important too, but it's more important to understand strange behavior danger, because a strange behavior can come even from a family member or from a family friend. And then you need to, if something's happened, or if someone
Yes.
is having strange behavior, you need to separate yourself from that. Or if that strange behavior has affected you negatively, then you need to be brave to speak up on your behalf, or maybe on the behalf of someone else. And so this school prevention program is one that we started last year, and it's been so receptive. And what happens is it opens the door to allow us to get into these schools to raise that awareness, number one, but then it also is kind of that first step into introducing our Worth It for Youth curriculum in the schools, which is paired up with their health and ed curriculum. And so we're seeing a lot of impact there. And we did a school a couple weeks ago. It had 2,200 students in it. After the ribbon cutting for the mural, and news and media were there to celebrate that. The superintendent from the district was there. Everybody kind of cleared out, and the principal texted me and said, "Hey, after we left there, one of the students came up to me and said, my dad beat me up and kicked me out of the house 2 weeks ago." And he started to have an open dialogue, and then he
Mm,
shared, a couple other students that were using those words of worth in their dialogue, and just sharing, like, "Hey, I feel seen," or "I haven't feel seen," or "I haven't felt heard." And that testimony from that principal is like, it's actually, it's happening, like, it's working. And so that's something that we're really excited for, that
yeah.
growth, and seeing, the community understand, rally behind that is really important. So that's how we address it in a holistic approach, is really hitting the needs of meeting them where they're at, providing stable housing, providing employment, and even on the prevention side, if we can stop it from ever happening, further exploitation from happening, then that's the greatest win of all. And that's how we do this work at Worthwhile.
Well, tell us, your locations, what areas you're working in, what states.
Yeah. So our primary location is in the Philadelphia area. I'm in Pennsylvania, and so we have several offices in the greater Philadelphia area, and so that's where we offer our outreach program. But one of the things that we love is our outreach program, Worth It, is designed to be used by other organizations. So other organizations can say, "Hey, we want to run our own Worth It program." We offer it completely for free. We provide the curriculum and we provide the training, and even during the first week, we can send someone out to help you kick off your first session of Worth It. And then that's something that other organizations around the country can run on their own after that. And it has the support of our team to keep that going. The school based initiative, that's, in other schools around the country, Indiana, Oklahoma. I think last year we had 36 states or areas that applied for Words of Worth. So our limitation is we have one artist right now. Is That's one limitation. The other is funding. So since we kind of foot the bill on that, that's where we, ask the community to step up, and we get supporters that help fund that. And so that's really, anywhere, again, in the country where there's a need, and we can accommodate it, as far as manpower and cost, we can do that. So, it's not just a here in our area thing, although a lot of our focus is in our area because that's where we have the majority of our staff. We really aim to work with other organizations and bolster their services through our Worth It program, or aim to scale up prevention in schools by working with our community, who's really, they're sounding the call and saying, "Hey, we need this in our school. We know that stuff's happening here." And so that's a broad reaching in that regard too. So yeah, that's kind of where our footprint is mainly in the Philly area, directly serving clients here, but then also more broadly speaking, the prevention through the schools, and then the expansion of the Worth It program through other partner agencies running it on their own. And what we see is great impact. We've had survivors share time and time again how it's really the first time they ever talked about their trauma. We run this program in prisons as well. And I was in one of our prison settings. I'll be at one of our male groups in prison next week. but our team's running it all the time, multiple times a week in different prison systems. But, I asked this group of women at one of the sessions and I said, who here has felt like, there's been a time in your life where you kind of got on track, you're doing well, things are going the right way. And they all raised their hand. I said, great, that's great. We can all reflect back on those moments. I said, then how many of you feel like you got off track? And every single one of them raised their hands. And of course they raised their hands because they're all in prison. So obviously it went off track to wind up where they're at. And I said, well, why do
Yeah.
we think that is?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so they kind of like didn't know how to answer why that happened. And I said, well, that's where we then started to talk about trauma. And so we really help individuals understand how trauma is an effect on so much of their life story, the direction they're on and the path they're on. And so we want them to recognize it and then begin to work on that. And one of the things we do too is we try to help our community understand, what does that look like? I think so often people will see a person looks just like they look fine, they look put together maybe, but trauma is kind of an ugly thing in the sense that it not only causes physical harm and emotional, but it's a mental state as well, where you have this internal dialogue of self-doubt, of devaluing of self. And so, we created a couple of years
Mhm.
ago a short film. If you go to our website, worthwhile.org, and go to our resource page, there's two videos. And one video is called The Voice of Trauma. And that's for a lot of individuals that maybe haven't worked with trauma survivors. And it's to help us understand that even though someone might look good on the outside, there's an internal battle going on the inside. And that short, it's only 90 seconds long, but that short film, I think, does a good job of that. Actually, I was speaking at a conference in North Carolina about 2 months ago, and someone came up to me and said, hey, you shared that video last year, and we now are using it in our trainings for the law enforcement to help them recognize it or think a little bit differently. Like, even though someone looks normal, recognize that they might be working through some significant trauma. And so that is a resource that we offer for our community. And then also on that resource page at worthwhile.org is the response to that. So the first video is called The Voice of Trauma, and the second video is called A Voice of Freedom. And it's a spoken word poem that a survivor that wrote. And Christina is just a phenomenal woman. She's a mom. She's a college grad. She's a spoken word artist. And we put her poem to this animation. And that really represents like the power of being heard. And that's why that's one of those 6 words of worth, is because so often trauma silences us. It overrides us with this negative talk. And it's important to know that you can overcome that. And that's one of the things we love is really a lot of times when working with trafficking organizations, they might highlight the bad, the ugly, bondage, they show dark ropes, chains, all those things. And although that may be part of the story for some trafficking survivors, it's not what we focus on. We focus on the hope, the reality that healing can happen and that we see healing happen. And hearing from survivors that, I was affected, yes, by trafficking, but I'm not reduced by it. I'm not less than because of it. And that's where that real
Mhm.
power comes in, that real healing happens.
Great. How does someone get involved in your organization?
Yeah, we love volunteers, as I already shared, and we encourage people to get involved. And there's a variety of ways to do it. Again, if you're not in the Philadelphia area where you can't get involved directly with us through our stores, through our housing program, our outreach program, that ACT challenge is something that people can do, or they can get involved through the school initiative, the Words of Worth initiative. And that's found on our website too, under Worth It for Youth. At the bottom of that page is the Words of Worth. And so we encourage the community to recommend schools, send that information our way, and connect us to the school principals or faculty. And that's one way they can get involved. And then, the other way, and this is kind of what you hear from a lot of nonprofits, but is through financial contributions. Those go 100% of the gifts given go directly to the programs. And that's another thing that I love, is that because we have our stores, we are, financially viable in the sense that we cover our overhead, we cover even our programming through that, but we have a lot of growth right now. And so when donors give, when organizations or businesses give, it goes to funding the programs directly. So those funds have direct impact. And so people can get involved that way. And that's something where we encourage, people to say, hey, I'd love to give, but I don't know where it's going, or how much is it used to pay Dan's salary, or marketing, and like, well, none of it goes towards that. It doesn't touch, any of that admin side. And so that's a powerful way that people can get involved and give and make a difference.
Great. Tell me maybe some success stories that you've results from your organization and helping. survivors.
Yeah. Do we have 3 or 4 hours yet we can do on this podcast? No,
Uh,
but I have a
whatever it
few.
takes.
Yeah, no, I have a few. Yeah, I think for what I love is when I, get to share how all of our programs work together. And one of these girls, women that I'll call her Janet. It's not a real name, but her story, is powerful.
Mm,
She shared at her graduation from our programs how she came to be there, and she said, "I remember very clearly. I was, north of us is this place called the Pocono Mountains." And she's like, I had gotten away from my trafficker. All I had were the clothes on my back. I was struggling with addiction. I was walking down the side of the road in the pouring rain. And she's like, I didn't know what to do or where to go. And I just looked up to the sky and said, "Bro, help me." And I love that. Like, I guess she was referring to God, I guess, but she used the name bro. And I'm like, that works too. And she said, then after
yeah.
that, I was able to find my way to
Mm,
a recovery center, and the recovery center referred me to Worthwhile's Worth It program. And then she went through our Worth It program, and from there applied into our and got into our housing program. Then while in our housing program, was able to get employment through our stores. While at our stores, built up her savings account. I think she graduated with around 10,000 in savings. She was able to then use that as a kind of a launch pad to get her career job. And she was sharing all this at her graduation from our programs, and her mom and dad were there, right? And her dad, he was kind of like a little bit on the stoic side, not a real talker, not emotional, but he got up and said, I just want to say something. And I was kind of surprised because he got up to say something. He's weeping, he's crying, this tough guy, and he says, "I never thought we'd have our daughter back," as he's hugging her, and they both are in each other's arms crying. And here is restoration at its fullest level, a family
mm,
restored, a woman restored. I mean, she's still, that's 3 years ago, still successful in her journey. And that's just one of the stories. I think of another survivor that came into our program, and some successes are as big as that, as what I just shared about Janet, but another one, um, I'll call her Andrea, again, not a real name, but she came into our program, and very quickly we started seeing, she was in our housing program. It was challenging because the rooms, they're shared. It's two per room, and we were having a hard time getting a roommate to stay with her because she would always have the lights on 24/7, even when she was sleeping. And we came to understand that through her, her counseling and working with our team, the reason for that was because when she was trafficked, her trafficker kept her in a basement, and not just in a basement, but in a basement, the lights off. And so when she escaped that, she had such a terror and
mm.
fear of darkness that she couldn't be in darkness. And she, over time, got more and more comfortable to where then she could sleep with the lights off. And that to me is a victory, and I think it's also a testament to what we do in our work
Oh, yes.
because, I think we think sometimes we're in a battle, right, of light versus darkness, and we might even mistakenly say they're equal in power. But the reality is, the beauty is light is one of those pervasive things. It's something that can go into a dark space, and darkness really has no power. It's the absence of light. And so what we really work to do is help these
Mhm.
individuals that we serve, women, men, youth, understand that we shine that light, that they have value and worth, and that begins to grow inside them. There's that hope again, that recognition that they have value and worth. And so it may be a graduate that goes through all of our programs, or one that's just able to turn off the lights. Those are wins, those are victories. And we see stories like that time and time again. And each year we serve, hundreds of survivors through our programs. And it's something where we hear it time and time again that this is the first time I felt seen or heard. This is the first time I didn't feel alone in my story or shame, or the first time I didn't blame myself for what happened. And those are all victories along the way that we see. And the reality too is that the healing journey is not a once and done. You kind of brush your hands off. I'm good. I'm healed. It's a journey, and we share that with survivors too. Is the reality is trauma is something that is deeply affects us, and it's that negative voice that's within us, and it'll always be there. And that's the hard part, to recognize that it never will fully be silenced or gone. However, through patience and counseling and care and healthy relationships, it can be quieted, and it can be put
Mhm.
at bay. And so we see that healing begin to happen, where individuals learn to adapt and heal and recover, and learn tools to be restored from their trauma. And yeah, those are the things that we see, and those are the things that are so encouraging. And just today, one of my staff sent me some quotes from some individuals that have gone through our program, and just what they shared, like I felt like I was in a safe space with other individuals, or I had never experienced a program like this where I've for the first time addressed my trauma. And those are the things that we want to keep having happen and keep moving forward. And not only is it impacting that one person, it has a ripple effect. It impacts their community. It impacts their family, as I shared with that about that one with her parents. But another one who's currently in our program, she is reunited with her daughter for the first time in 7 years, and she's just ecstatic. Like she's so thrilled because she lost custody while she was, serving prison time, and also through struggling through addiction, which was brought on through the trafficking. And she's now, reunited with her daughter, having conversations with her mother, and she's feeling like she's whole again. And that's just what we want. We want that for everyone. And so, we're seeing it happen, and that's what's really exciting.
Great. Reviews some your programs. You had the ones in the schools. You have your properties. Just give us a brief recap of all the ways you're able to help people.
Yeah. So we seek to reach survivors where they're at in the community through our Worth It program. We provide that educational resource, and that's in schools, in prisons, in community centers, in recovery centers. We also then offer stability, and that's where they have the option for long-term housing through our housing programs, and that's they build that new foundation. They have again that option for sustainability through employment through our stores, our worthwhile thrift stores. And that's something too that I didn't mention earlier, but the worthwhile thrift is turning into again another national endeavor where we offer what's called the worthwhile thrift partner network. So if you or your listeners know an agency that's serving survivors of trafficking but doesn't have a means to employ them and also would like another revenue stream, we can start a worthwhile thrift near that location, and operate it to help fund that organization and provide employment to the survivors. So we do that. And then the last thing, as you mentioned, was the schools and that prevention piece. So that's again, the idea is holistic, and really a holistic approach isn't just the services offered, but listening to the survivor themselves. And so what that also means is sometimes, I feel like there's a big miss on the parts of organizations and agencies that are serving, because we'll address again the things that we can see. They're hungry, we feed them. They're homeless, we give them shelter. They have trauma, we do counseling. Again, all necessary. But we also get surveys, and we survey those the clients that are going through our programs. And one of the things that's always stood out to me is this one question that's asked: Is faith important to you? And 75% say yes, it's very important to me. And so I think it's a miss, and I would say I can confidently say it is
Hmm.
a miss, not think, but it is a miss in that we don't. If we're going to address the whole person, right, and that's 75% of your population saying that's important to me, and we kind of bypass it, that's a disservice. So we often we offer that discussion as well. Say, hey, let's talk about it. Like, let's if that's important to you, let's help you on that journey as well. And that's one thing too where we find, because that faith element, it makes us recognize that there's something more than us. And a lot of times when you have experienced significant hurt, especially from people maybe that you love, because it's in our surveys, we have the percentage of 57% have been exploited through family. So familial trafficking is the majority, right? It's not the minority. And when you imagine like a caregiver or a parent, someone that should be a person you feel safe around, is the one that's exploiting you. Well, that's a deep, deep hurt. And so
Hmm.
we want them to recognize that they, even though they've been hurt from that, that they can feel safe again. And so, yeah, we try to help them move past that and heal from that. So, yeah, those are things that we're seeing and ways that we help.
When you started this program, did you ever imagine it reaching the point where it is now?
It's a funny question. You might be surprised by the answer, but I would say yes, but it took longer than I expected. And I tell people, so like I have kind of like an
Yeah.
entrepreneurial mindset, right? And I love building structure and putting good people in place to run it. But if you ever want to choose the hardest form of business to do, it's a nonprofit, because there's no profit. You're constantly reinvesting in the people and reinvesting in your programs. And so it makes it slower. The process to growth is slower, but I'd say you can't rush a good
Right.
thing, right? And good things that are worth pursuing are oftentimes hard. So I'm glad for where we're at. It's kind of where my goal vision was, 14 and a half years ago, was to like, let's get to a scale where we can help a lot of people annually. It just took a lot longer, but I guess that's probably on me too, that needing to be patient. But I've grown too a lot in this role, just being a better
Yeah.
husband, a better father, because recognizing that we all, see the world slightly different than the other. We all are affected by different hurts from our past, and we need to be patient with each other. We need to be mindful of that. And when we put others before ourselves, we're all better for it. It sounds almost counterintuitive. We oftentimes live a life of this idea of like, if I again buy stuff for myself or I indulge every desire, I'll be happy. And the sad, frank reality is when you do that, you're miserable. And it seems counterintuitive. I'm pursuing everything that I want, and yet I'm miserable. And so I encourage people, if you want to find purpose, purpose is found in people. And so yeah, I love that. That's not something I thought I would learn. So that's one thing I wasn't expecting, is to have that shift in mindset. But it's one I'm very grateful for, and one that I think is innate, kind of a core value of who I am now. That when I started out, it was led by passion or driven by passion. That kind of drive to help others. But then in time, I myself have grown in this work. So I'm grateful for that as well. And that was unexpected.
Great. Again, before we leave, tell us again how to get in touch with you and your organization.
Yeah. I'd love for your listeners to be able to reach out, contact us. Our website, I shamelessly plugged it a few times, but I'll plug it again, is worthwhile.org. And that's spelled WORTHUHILE .org. And you can read about all of our different resources, see videos, testimonials from survivors that have gone through our programs. And so people can get involved there, or they can email us at info at worthwhile.org. Reach out, say, hey, I have a school I want to get involved with, or hey, I want to get involved in something else that you shared on that podcast. Please reach out. We don't want this just to be a once and done thing. Maybe see this as a start to a new relationship with your listening audience.
That's great. I want to thank you again for number one, what you do for the community and for the survivors. We need more organizations and more people like you out there to help with the survivors when they come out of their trauma. Again, thank you, Dan,
Yeah.
and keep up the great work.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
All right. Bye
Bye
bye.
bye.
Well, that's it for our show for today. Hope you learned something that will perhaps protect you and a family member. Follow me on Facebook. Go to my website, davidjstory.com, to learn more about the Omega book series, my podcast, and my blogs. And always remember, always watch your six and others too.